first look at the theme for this year, again, it's the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. As my main job in the military was telecommunications, so everything communications, I thoroughly enjoyed that. That's your satellite communications, telephones, internet, all of those things. And toward the end of my career, I was at the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. The Army says DOME. It's called something different now, but that's where I ended my career at Patrick Air Force Base. Not a bad place for an Army person to retire after serving 3 years in Wiesbaden, Germany for the Senior Mission Commander, the general in that particular area, where I was his equal opportunity advisor. And then I had the unique opportunity to go back to DOME, where I performed duties as a small group instructor, platform instructor and I've had thousands of students ranging from the E5 level to the O5 level. So I've definitely talked and have a lot of great experiences with learning more about people and their diversity, which we'll kind of go over a little bit later. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of who I am and what we're going to be talking about. So why do we even have a Black History Month? Where does that come from? Who does that start with, and what is kind of the background? And I want to give that to you today. Our story begins, the origins of everything begin in Chicago in the summer of 1915. Dr. Carter G. Woodson is who we're going to be referring to mostly today. And he's an alumnus of the University of Chicago. And he went to Washington, D.C., where there was a 3-week event, and what they were doing was celebrating the 50 years of the emancipation. At this event, there were exhibits highlighting the destruction of slavery. So as he was there, it was being held at the 1912 Republican Convention at that Coliseum that was held in 1912, not the year that this was taking place in 1915. And what he noticed was when he was there, people from all over, there was a crowd of people between about 6,000 and 12,000 who were looking to get into to see these exhibits of the destruction of slavery and all the other exhibits. So Dr. Woodson, he recognized that, and what you'll notice about Dr. Woodson is throughout this history, he always wanted greater impact when it related to Black history and where we started and where we came from. This particular organization, Hampton Institute, he had a saying, and I quote, "We are going back to a beautiful history in which it will inspire us to greater achievements." And then in February in 1926, he put out a press release, and in that press release it said that he was announcing Negro History Week for it to be in February. So the question is, why is it in February? I mentioned that in the beginning there, and it was because of originally for tradition and reform. And as you look at the two prominent men in February, whose birthdays were in February, who had a prominent role in Black history, was Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. To the birthdays, their birthdays were on the 12th and the 14th, respectively, and people were already celebrating, so he didn't want to, and this all of this created a more success for him, because he didn't recreate anything. He just kept what was already going on, and then he expanded the information to learn more about Black history. So he aimed for the study to go from two prominent men, two great Americans, to be about the Black race, because he believed that the people who even gave history and would stand up in front of people and give history about the two gentlemen, in his words, he called them ignorant spellbinders, people who lacked the knowledge to give the information, the correct history, and all of the history about these two gentlemen. So that was very important to him. And so he envisioned that the study and celebration be about the race, not just two people. Abraham Lincoln, not being the only reason for freeing of Black slaves, he says that the Union Army and thousands of Black soldiers from the Union Army and sailors were the reason for the freedom of the slaves. So he wanted to make sure that it was focused on throughout history, the black male and females who gave contributions to the advancement of the human civilization. The week-long observance was really, from Dr. Woodson's perspective, that wasn't the goal. The goal for Dr. Woodson was to have education all year round, to where the culmination of that year in February, people would come together and share what they have learned in that week instead of learning everything compacted into that 1 week. He wanted it to be a year-long process. And that's what he was striving to do. He wanted more impact. He wanted more Black and African American people and the people in the community to learn more about what he was referring to. And so during the civil rights, he incorporated into the curriculum for that social change. Cultural activist, his name is Frederick Hammurabi. He is from Chicago. He changed his name to an African name in the 1930s. And what he did is he used his house of knowledge. That's something that he created. And what he did is he fused those two things together with the African consciousness and combined it with and fused those together with the Black past. So people became increasingly aware of the consciousness of links to Africa, and they replaced Negro History Week like at a very quick pace once he did that. And in the 1970s, let's say in specifically 1976, it represented the 50 years of the first celebration of the shift from a Negro History Week. It went from a week to a month, and then from Negro to Black. Every year, there's also a presidential proclamation, and every president since then, Republican or Democrat, has put out a presidential proclamation for Black History Month. And you can find that if you want to take a look at that. It's not too lengthy. It's probably a couple paragraphs, but it's information based off of current events and things that represent the Black people and African American people today. That came out on February 3rd, if you want to look that up. That's probably a little bit too long for us to read here today, and I just want to offer that to you. So now what I would like to do is look at the identity. How do we speak? One of the things that was shared in some of my students was in their culture, speaking loudly, for example, in certain places. In their culture, if you speak low, and people around you think you're going against them, they think you're conniving, they think that you're talking about them. May not be the case, but that's what they believe. So everybody in that particular culture would share loudly. And in some areas of the United States, for example, speaking loudly, say in a restaurant, is kind of frowned upon, and it's like, hey, we're trying to have a nice quiet dinner. So depending on what is learned at that level, some of the other things and attributes of being taught in those first several years is, do you hold doors open for people? Do you say sir, ma'am, things like that, your customs and courtesies, discipline. I know when I was being raised, the preferred method of correction was maybe a little whooping by my parents, and you may have the same experience. And sometimes you had to go get your discipline off of a tree that made a little wishing sound when they swung it at you and hit you on your butt, or your backside, I should say. And if you look at it from the difference of now, where it may be, there's a timeout. You need to go on a timeout, and you need to think about what you did. And a lot of us would have loved to had a timeout and think about it instead of receiving the little bit of pain. But most of us turned out okay. So it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. These are just some of the things that people learn in those first 10 years of their life. The main proponent of that is the family. Now, family can have many different definitions for the individual. A family could be maybe they were raised in a foster home, maybe they had foster parents, they were adopted, or it could be a traditional mother or father. Sometimes they can be raised by, say, the grandparents, great-grandparents in some cases, older siblings, and those different eras. One of the terms I always sometimes hear from students was, that person is an old soul. And what is the old soul? The old soul is somebody who has maybe the values of and belief systems of the era before them, before their parents. And it kind of translates down into that, and that's very important. And see, that's an opportunity to ask that particular person or group of people a question: who is the person that raised you, or who are the people that raised you? Now, being a recruiter and seeing some of the different school settings in inner city Atlanta compared to, say, Dunwoody or Sandy Springs or those areas, some of the schools, and maybe you can relate, some of the schools don't have all the access that some schools do. And what I mean by access is maybe they have books in this school and they use computers in this school, or they have a computer lab. Maybe the teachers are brand new over here and the school teachers over here are more seasoned and they have more experience and they have a different style. Now, just because somebody comes from a certain educational background doesn't mean they can't succeed, because I had many students from the inner cities that were super smart and could join the military and could go on to college and do all those different things. But what some of the schools don't have is after school care. For example, say a tutor. Maybe they have extracurricular activities like band and choir and wood shop and all these different things, where the other school has all of that. And I've had students from, or I say enlistees from other nicer areas who didn't do as well, say on the ASVAB, than the students that went to the inner city. It goes back and forth. It's just how they were raised from that first 10 years on how they're going to be primarily for the rest of their life. And they can draw from that experience. So the education definitely plays a role when you consider the black family and even your family as well. And then if you think about it, if you have kids, now my kids are all grown, we send them to school and their peers and their friends, they spend majority of their day at school, and especially if they're school age, unless they're homeschooled, of course, there's always exceptions, but they can spend time with friends that are also being homeschooled. But generally speaking, their peers, and for some reason, at least my kids sometimes used to think that this person with 13, 14, 15 years on this earth knew more than I did, and that I didn't know anything, with being around for, however many years I've been around. And they would sometimes get their education and their belief system, sometimes it would change slightly from these peers and friends. And that was always could be a challenge sometimes. But they always see it my way toward the end because I'm just always right. No, I'm just joking. Sometimes when you meet somebody that years later you meet the real them, that's when there can be a little bit of conflict. And I thought you were this way, or I thought you were not that way. But we can save that for another time. All right, so that's the identity and where the identity comes from. And again, that can be different for every single family. That could be different for somebody from California, excuse me, or somebody from Florida. And it just doesn't matter. People from the same city, the same block, or the same street can be exactly the same in every other way, but be totally different. Just because they look the same doesn't mean that they believe in the same and have the same morals and values based on the other information that we discussed already. All right, now valuing diversity, this is definitely important. And if you look at the military, for example, there's a lot of diversity. One of the things that I used to do when I was a senior instructor at Diomi is when the students would come in for the first day, I would watch. Now there's a huge U-shaped classroom or auditorium, I should say, and they could sit anywhere they wanted. And what I always noticed and took note of is who was sitting next to who. People are driven to people that look like them because they believe they can relate to them and those type of things. So what I would notice is they would take a quick scan of the room, look all the way around and say, okay, well, they're the Army people. I don't want to hang there. I want to go over here with the Navy, female, male, officer, enlisted, and people would kind of pick different areas. Some people just don't care and they would sit anywhere. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, not necessarily. That is just where that person thinks they're going to be comfortable. But throughout that education process, they learn with the diversity that they have that people can not look like me and have something really in common, such as I love to bowl, or I like to fish, or I like to go to the beach, I like to snow ski, I like to water ski, I like to read, I like this team, I like whatever. So there can be definitely similarities between people who don't look like each other, and there's definitely some not similarities between people who actually look like each other and from the same area. So what I talk about is stereotypes, and just briefly, not to name any specific stereotypes, but I want you to, if you don't already, have the mindset of a stereotype is a negative, a fixed, rigid idea, oversimplification, if you will, and it's dangerous when applied. Apply means that you say this person likes a certain type of food, you say this person is good at a certain type of sport, or they're good at a certain type of subject, and they can't meet that expectation. That person may get offended. Let's say they get offended because of the stereotype that you voiced to them. A lot of time, people, what they will do is they'll say, you know what? They put the burden of responsibility on the people that they just offended. And this happens so much in the Army, at least in the military, from my experience, is the burden of responsibility for me offending you relies on you. You took it the wrong way. That's not what I meant. And these are some of the things that they say. Instead of, you know what I said was wrong. I can see that it hurt you, it offended you, it upset you. From this point forward, I will not tell those type of jokes, right? That's how it starts to be fixed. But there's a step before that, and it's a word called generalization that can be used where that's a starting point. So if you look at the stereotype as an ending point, generalization is I have this stereotype, I have this belief about how I think you're going to be, and I'm not going to act upon it, but I'm going to use it as an opportunity to try and learn more about that person.